What is going on, Badger fans? Another great episode. We got John Garcia Jr. on. We're going to talk about a prospect that committed that him and I haven't had a chance to talk about since he committed, plus some running back targets in 2024 and what Wisconsin did with their media blitz. All of that with John Garcia Jr. As always, a great guest to have on the show. On Wisconsin, let's go.
You are Locked On Badgers, your daily podcast on the Wisconsin Badgers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, everybody? Welcome to Locked On Badgers, your team every single day. I'm your host, as always, Ryan Herrings. Really do appreciate everybody tuning into the show. We got John Garcia Jr. jumping on. Hasn't been on the show in a minute. He is Locked On's recruiting insider, as always. John, thank you for jumping on the show, my friend.
Absolutely, Ryan. Good to be back.
So we haven't talked in a minute. I had some work travel. A long time ago, we talked about Jamel Howard, but we didn't talk about him really since he committed his game, what you thought of him, maybe some of the areas of growth you saw. What is Jamel Howard on film to you as a prospect?
Oh, man, he's fun. Give me a 300-plus pounder with quickness and pass rushing prowess any day. Jamel profiles like a gap filler, a guy who can occupy blockers and allow linebackers to fast flow behind him on the way to the ball carrier, but he plays like it's his sole job to get into the backfield and go do all of that himself. There's a lot of confidence in his game and a lot of kind of good risk taking. I'll say good risk taking. It's like a DB who you see him gamble a lot, but man, he comes up with the football a good bit, so you're kind of okay with it. Jamel does that with his pass rushing game. I mean, he will use stuff that is, built for guys 100 pounds lighter than him, swim moves and counters and spins and some bounding stuff that is not for 320 pounders, but yet he does it successfully. So I really like the ambition that Jamel plays with. Big physical player. He still can win from a leverage and contact point perspective like you want a 300 pounder to, but there's a little more pizzazz to this guy's game. And I think that's why his recruitment kind of went crazy when he did not sign in December, and he became this really interesting late commodity on the defensive interior. One, because there's just not a lot of guys like that physically, but when you throw on the tape and look at his game specifically, there really wasn't anybody on the interior like Howard available leading up to February 1st. So it became nuts, right? LSU, Ole Miss, Miami, Michigan, Illinois, of course, Wisconsin. Everybody wanted a piece of Howard. So for the Badgers to get him recommitted was obviously a really big deal, because some of those schools that we mentioned are streamlining the recruiting process and able to pull nationally with relative ease. So that was a really big deal for Wisconsin.
And let's take that one step further. And by the way, credit to you, John. When we did our very first show about Jamel Howard, I said, well, I really like him, but he's a little underranked, under-recruited, like not a lot of great offers. He said, no, this guy's film is really good. Like, just wait. I think you actually said that. Just wait and see what happens. The offers may come for him, and they did. So credit to you on that one, being ahead of that bell curve. What does it mean for Wisconsin to beat a school like LSU and a school like Michigan for a defensive line commit?
I mean, that's a heck of a sentence, right? And I think it's an attitude play. And it's another reminder, hey, this is going to be something that we see tangibly right now with Wisconsin. This is a modern right now type of play. It doesn't mean Howard's going to be, all Big Ten in 2023, but it was a heavyweight big boy battle. You talk about the trenches, and when you're going against LSU and Michigan, teams almost synonymous for it, especially Michigan, right? I mean, that's development in the trenches is like how Michigan has gotten to this mountaintop over the last couple of years. So when you win that type of battle, it's a really big deal. And at one point, it looked like Michigan was going to be the victor, right? It looked like if he signed in December, he was probably going to go there. But he wanted to just see how much he could bet on himself, which goes right along with his physical play style, right? He is a confident player. So not surprised he bet on himself, and definitely not surprised to see the increased attention around Howard. I mean, this recruitment got so crazy that the last weekend of the cycle, it wasn't a matter of, will Howard take an official visit? It was like, where would he take an official? Because he just saw LSU, and the rest of the South collectively was like, holy crap, there's another good D lineman available. Let's go get him. And I think he was scheduled for Ole Miss, and then he ended up visiting Miami instead. So Ole Miss didn't even get a chance to host him. That's how frantic and coveted the recruitment around Jamel was. So that alone screams big deal. But like you said, profiling it against teams that we think are ahead of Wisconsin from a talent and on-field product perspective, like LSU and Michigan, that is huge, because those are the kind of battles you got to win. It's nice to beat up on the bottom of the Big Ten and the top of the group of five in the Midwest, sprinkle in a Notre Dame in there maybe. It's good to win those battles, but you've got to beat Ohio State and Penn State and Michigan in particular within the Big Ten. And if you expand, you got to go down and beat the SEC and ACC schools that want to come up into the Midwest to pluck some talent. That's the other thing. When's the last time LSU needed a player from Illinois? Ditto for Miami, ditto for Ole Miss. Doesn't happen a whole lot. So you also have to kind of protect the Midwest and keep this kid in Big Ten country. Obviously, Wisconsin was able to do it twice. One, before he became so coveted under its previous administration, and secondly, when he was arguably the most coveted interior guy in the country down the stretch.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about something you hit on your first point. I couldn't count the number of times I've been told a 3-4 defensive lineman just needs to occupy blockers, right? Occupy the block. The linebackers will make the tackle. Like, don't worry about the stats. That's not their job. And I've always hated that idea, right? That's the bare minimum for like a 3-4. But the good ones still get pressure. Like, no coach is going to say, hey, no, don't go make a play in the backfield. You're supposed to occupy blockers. Howard, to me, and you hit on it, he can do both of those things. Like, he's not just a leaner. I was really impressed. Honestly, I was really impressed by his motor. Like, you've seen him track down plays from behind the line, the cross line of scrimmage, 7 yards down the field. He can do everything, in my opinion, and he could line up in a 4-3, a 3-4, and be successful.
I agree. And that's what every defense is going to demand anyway, right? You've got to be multiple in this day and age, because for every spread look you're going to get, when the weather turns and the down is short or the distance is short, it's going to be a lot more old school downhill. So you got to be able to do both things relatively well. And I think Howard is one of those guys. Again, he's a smaller, quicker player in a big man's body. And that's a great thing, right? Who's to say he should just be a role player, for lack of a better phrase? He wants to be the star, which is what you want. That's how he created this ascent for himself. So that's something that Wisconsin needs to utilize when he gets there for good. On top of all his high floor and traditional talents, he maximized the new and modern stuff simultaneously. And like you said, there's going to be a package where he needs to be that gap filler, and he needs to play the leverage and weight game. But there's going to be a lot of other situations where, no, he needs to be a penetrator, a disruptor, a guy that you look at as the quickest path towards the quarterback is right in front of him. So I think that is something that it's invaluable. It's a position where, from a pressure perspective, we don't see consistency there. So if you can even somewhat or even flash as a disruptor from the interior, you're making everything easier on those edge players, the linebackers, and certainly the secondary simultaneously. And when you think of the Luke Fickell team and an identity, that's the type of presence that you want up front.
I want to ask you this. Obviously, we talked about Howard committing, decommitting, and recommitting. Tretch did the same thing, right? Committed, decommitted, recommitted. How unusual is it for a staff to get multiple players kind of back in the, especially players with high level opportunities, to get those guys back in the fold?
It is extremely rare. Any one player would be rare. This is not something that happens, especially through a coaching change. Normally, it's pretty one-to-one. Hey, new coaching staff's here, and either the player says, okay, I'm going to use this opportunity to open things up and see where I'm at, which is kind of what Jamel did. Or on the other side of it, maybe there's not a fit from the school's perspective. Usually it's a moving on, a parting of ways of sorts, if that move is made. Typically, if you're going to stick, you don't decommit. You kind of hang around and say, maybe I'll take them a couple more visits, but I'm not going to decommit and detach myself from this school. Yet and still, both of those guys did. And at different points, Ryan, had buzz for other schools. We mentioned Howard with Michigan in December. I mean, a lot of Oregon folks I talked to thought they were going to grab Tretch. So I thought that was even more impressive of a win on the offensive side of the ball, because that's really the perceptional overhaul. I think defensively, you think, okay, Luke Fickell is going to maintain a lot of the core identity, maybe build upon some of the other areas, but offensively, total overhaul, total shakeup. So to win a battle with flashy Oregon for a wide receiver from the West Coast, no less. Again, it profiles really well for the belief and benefit of the doubt with Wisconsin going forward. But to get any recommitments, especially through a coaching change, it's a big deal. It's pretty darn rare, especially if you don't retain their guy, right? If there was a certain positional coach or recruiter that really drew one of these guys to Wisconsin and they were retained, fine. You can get that. Like we saw that a lot with Auburn with Cadillac Williams being retained. The running back stayed committed. Big surprise there. That's a little bit more conventional than this situation. So it's an even bigger deal that Wisconsin was able to do this.
That's a great point because the Badgers didn't retain any positional coaches, so it was a clean slate. Great stuff as always. Coming up, we're going to talk about a couple 24 running back prospects that the Badgers are in on and what John thinks of those guys. But first, a quick word from our friends of the show over at FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. New friends of our show, but we've used them before, to be honest. They are everywhere. They are incredible. And if you need to get going NBA style, they are the official sportsbook partner of the NBA. Really excited to do all sorts of things with FanDuel. You can go into different same game parlays, picking out who's going to win the NBA championship. That's all available on FanDuel. Multiple opportunities to bet, including get your no sweat first bet, get $1,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't hit. Guaranteed, win or lose, get $1,000 back on your no sweat first bet through FanDuel if you're signing up. And it lets you do everything from money line to point spreads, player props, same game parlays. Again, I've talked about the Phoenix Suns basically every show about that's where I have my money to win the title. This is pre-Durant. I'm definitely in on them now. They're plus 500 on the FanDuel app. And the FanDuel app is, as always, secure, safe, super easy to use. Best of all, you get paid your winnings absolutely instantly. You don't have to wait for it. And it's the most stable industry standard betting sports book that is out there. That's why we use it. That's why we encourage you to use it. If you're a first-time user, that's perfect. You get to see everything for the first time as it's set up. Their customer support is incredibly easy to use. Make every moment more with FanDuel.com, the official sportsbook partner of the NBA. And don't forget to join FanDuel today at FanDuel.com/lockedon. Claim your no sweat first bet. FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more. All right, we're going to bring John back onto the show. John, as always, want to give you an opportunity. Where can people follow you on social media and see what you got going on?
Yeah, just type in my name, John Garcia _JR. A lot of college football and recruiting content right up to you, right for free, especially here on the Locked On Network.
Love it. A couple 24 running backs, super interesting that the Badgers are in on, John. I want to get your take on. The first is Jordan Marshall. Both of these are pretty high-profile running backs, 4-star type talents. Marshall out of Cincinnati, Ohio, 5'11", 190, great offer list. What are your take on his game when you watch him play?
Oh, just so much balance. There's a lot to like about the floor with Jordan Marshall. He can absolutely churn vertically and downhill, but the lateral stuff is there all the same. You mentioned 5'11", 193 or so. So physically there from a Saturday perspective, and it's something easy to see. The production, all that stuff is there. And he's at Moeller. I mean, that's one of the schools in the country, much less the state of Ohio. So when you're threatening 2,000 yards at a school like that, you're going to have a strong offer list, as you mentioned. And look, the schools that are in the running reflect that too. It's Ohio State, it's Michigan, it's Wisconsin, Tennessee's trying to pull him down to the SEC. This is a heavyweight recruiting battle here that the Badgers are kind of sneaking in on, I would say. This was one that you would initially just profile as kind of an Ohio State, Michigan type of deal. I think on the front end of it, again, big high-level Big Ten recruit, going to stay in Big Ten country, maybe throw a Penn State in there. But Wisconsin's been kind of the dark horse in this thing. Luke Fickell, one of his kids plays at Moeller or played at Moeller. So that's interesting, from a connection standpoint. Obviously, he's from Cincinnati. So that previous staff, got in early on him and had been coveting and valuing him for quite some time. So now that new staff is up at Wisconsin, the Badgers are going to be a player here. So I'm curious to see what this timeline looks like. What official visits are going to be planned, and is this going to be a pre-senior season decision? It usually breaks that way, but with 4 schools really emerging as the contenders, you would assume all 4 of them got their official visits before the commitment, I should say, goes down. So if that's the case, Wisconsin's going to have more than a puncher's chance here, and they're going to be a legitimate contender.
And I wanted to ask you about that. So obviously the Cincinnati connection, the Moeller connection, Luke Fickell, previous staff at Cincinnati. Now, obviously, they're not going to pull a kid like this to Cincinnati, most likely. But that connection and his reputation and his cachet as that type of Midwestern coach now carried over to Wisconsin. That obviously Jordan Marshall we're talking about here, but for Ohio kids in general and Midwestern kids in general, I feel like that's going to resonate, and they're going to know Luke Fickell's name and what he can do at a program. And that's going to help elevate Wisconsin's recruiting in those areas, in Cincinnati, in Pennsylvania.
100%. And it's going to help him get on campus earlier too, right? Marshall's already visited Wisconsin. We know he frequented Cincinnati and knew of that staff intimately. But when you get up to Wisconsin pretty quickly for those big junior days, you're still reciprocating that type of interest. So again, you wonder now what it looks like going forward with the official visits and how much you can hammer that home. But from a staff and a relationship standpoint, Wisconsin's going to be in a good spot. And now I think it's going to be more about updating the cell. Normally it's the opposite, right? This Phil Longo offense is going to be explosive and exciting and up tempo. So now you're just trying to personalize it with people. This is kind of the opposite. I think the people. It's more about expanding it to the cell and how you fit as more of a classic balanced back in a more modern system. How can you still fit? Obviously, Longo's had success with great backs, and Wisconsin has had success with great backs, but kind of molding those pitches together.
Yeah, I love it. Let's talk about Darrion Dupree, the other running back I want to talk to you about. Been to Wisconsin as well. Also a four-star running back, about 5'11", 190, similar size, different styles. I think they have different styles, but similar size. This one out of Illinois. What do you think of when you watch Darrion's film?
I like the balance here as well. I think he's a little bit more equipped to play in space. But like we saw with Marshall, there's a lot of decisiveness and downhill ability here. Hard to bring down. That was the first note I wrote down. Just hard to tackle at 190 pounds. So you wonder what that looks like with a college strength and conditioning and nutritional program. Kind of scary. But a guy who's a little bit more equipped for space, a little bit more of an acquired taste, I would say, than a Jordan Marshall. But folks have definitely come around on this one, and that's why Dupree, speaking of, is one of the hottest recruits in the country at the running back position. In the last 2 months, he's really acquired the bulk of the current scholarship offers that he's looking at, and now it's Power 5 every other day, seemingly. So I think Wisconsin jumped in like in December, and really from that point, as that junior tape circulated a little bit more, Dupree's become this kind of very easy to see Big Ten running back projection. I think Michigan State is actually the most recent school to jump in. So a little bit earlier in his recruitment compared to Marshall, which means a lot more contenders, a lot more schools trying to figure out what their positioning might be for Dupree as opposed to Marshall, where we're kind of set on those 4 schools. This one is a little bit more zoomed out, and I think there's a longer process to go between now and a verbal commitment. But again, Wisconsin's one of the first of this batch of schools that have jumped in on Dupree. That stuff matters. So now, again, it gets to the visit game, and you start to wonder, or I'm wondering, how Wisconsin's going to attack the position from a volume perspective, right? Because now, depending on the timelines of these guys, you got to play those cards right relative to how many backs you want, just as much as which running backs you might want in the class. But it's fair to view these two together because they're both Midwestern backs, similar offer lists, and I think the timelines are going to start to line up later rather than sooner.
Well, and from the Badgers' perspective, you still have the in-state running back Nate White, who's obviously Corey White, sorry, who's obviously a high target there. So, there's going to be a question about how many numbers they want to take. The interesting thing to me with Dupree, and I get your quick take on this, is, as you mentioned, more of an open field guy at times, really good at breaking tackles, but I thought a lot of those guys in high school dance a lot in between the tackles. He was really decisive. Like, it looks like he can run between the tackles pretty naturally, and he has that outside burst, outside ability.
Yeah, like you said, I think these two guys are similar. They're built similarly. Both of them are going to be balanced and decisive, and that's something to like, especially when you talk about Dupree, in the state of Illinois, where it's not what Marshall's facing in Cincinnati, right? Playing at Moeller, it's not the same type of competition. So you do expect a little bit more, I guess, flexibility But you're not getting that with Dupree. It's still very decisive. He hits the hole very hard, and he runs really hard. And I think that's really impressive at his size because, think of a guy like Isaiah Pacheco, we just saw kind of break out in the playoffs and in the Super Bowl, former Big Ten back at Rutgers. That's the style that I kind of look at with Dupree. Doesn't look like the biggest, but he runs a lot bigger than he is. And there's still classic space traits that go along with it to where he is tough to bring down both physically and just from a logistics standpoint, trying to get to him when he does see some green.
Yeah, I agree. I really enjoyed watching both these films, to be honest. And it's pretty easy to see the fit either way in Madison with Phil Longo and the offense being spread out. Corey Smith, I said Corey White earlier. Corey Smith, the guy I was looking for my name bank, mixing up with Nate White, 2023 recruit. Great stuff coming up. We want to talk a little bit about the New York blitz from the Badgers, the publicity side, the NIL. How unique is that actually when we zoom out? We're going to talk about that next with John Garcia Jr. But first, a word from our friends of the show. All right, we're going to bring John Garcia Jr. back on the show. One more segment. John, I think I was texting you during signing day when the Badgers were putting all the billboards up in New York City, Times Square, really advertising the program. We're very hyper-focused, obviously, on the Badgers here. How unique it is what the Badgers did from a larger standpoint? Are other schools doing things similar to this, or was that more of a, wow, Wisconsin's kind of doing something different here?
Billboards in general, Ryan, have become a popular signing day sort of tradition, right? But it's usually in the college town. So it would have been in Madison, billboards up for every recruit. I've seen some schools do it in the hometowns of recruits, which is cool, right? Especially if you're going far away. It's like, yeah, we won this battle for your guy kind of thing. But Times Square in New York City is its own animal, right? The most famous advertising corner on planet Earth. And it's digital, right? So you can go through multiple players. I think they had like a 15-minute block, bought up in Times Square. So that part of it is really rare. We do not see it in Times Square really ever from a recruiting standpoint. Google told me like Joey Harrington was the last one. I mean, you're talking pre-millennium. So I do think that it was really unique from a Wisconsin perspective. But more importantly, Ryan, like we said when Fickell got the job, like we said when he started hitting the portal, and like we said when he started assembling this staff, this is a national deal now when you talk Wisconsin. It's not regional, it's not Big Ten, Midwestern footprint. All those things apply, but it's zoomed out and it's national. And this was, to me, symbolic of the desire to be national. You can recruit nationally out of necessity, or you can do so out of the desire to just simply go get the best. And that's the direction that Wisconsin is going to move forward with. We talked about it again, specifically when Fickell took the job, when he's had so many opportunities over the years. Why this one? And now I think we're starting to get some of those answers. Like, let's take that brand that is pretty darn likable regionally. Let's make that its own national thing. And I think they've executed that really well, certainly from a buzz department. And that was literally from a buzz department with the collective aligned. And that's what we're starting to see with the best talent accumulators in the country. How aligned are you with your top collectives, and how is it presented publicly? That this was kind of one of those perfect blends where all sides really got to show off and celebrate this first batch of brand new Badgers under Fickell. So other schools will copy it. It will become more of a thing going forward. But yeah, I think from a recruiting and Times Square perspective, I think Wisconsin's maybe the first that I've seen. More of the other ones have been with current players, right? LSU had Odell Beckham on there, a couple schools like that, but they were already at the school, not just beginning to claim their path towards that school. So I thought it was really fun, and it will be imitated going forward.
One of the things that I liked about it too was it feels like it's almost like you're not marketing, obviously, to the people walking around in Times Square as much, but you're showing future recruits that we are going to put you out there. Like, we are going to advertise you as a brand. And we saw some like Cole LaCruz was excited about it. Other Wisconsin Badger fans, our players were excited about it. People were tweeting about it, and other recruits in future classes saw that, right? They liked those tweets. They're encouraged by the fact that Wisconsin is putting you out there on a bigger stage. And to me, it feels like that might be some of the benefit from this.
Right, because the perception of Wisconsin was great program, high floor. How high is the ceiling? Is it national? Those were the questions. this is all pushing against that. And like you said, the next generation, the next group starts to see that. And that's, part of the raising of the ceiling. And that's why you bring in a Fickell. That's why you bring in a Longo. That's why you go national to show that, hey, we want to be one of these teams. We want to be one of these players on that stage, not just regionally or limited to our conference.
Yeah, I love it. He is John Garcia Jr. John, thank you as always for jumping on the show. I encourage everybody to go follow him on Twitter. He's a great resource for all, not just recruiting news, but college football news, college football information. Go follow him, John. Until next week, hopefully we'll see you again. But appreciate it as always, my friend.
Thanks for having me on, Ryan.
On Wisconsin, and we'll talk to you all later.